So I think it's also helping people to see what, the art of the possible. So just because you've withdrawn from that for a while doesn't mean that you can't go back to that. What can we put in place to make that possible for you? Do your research, and I think above all, choose a provider that you feel is listening to you.
You're listening to the Care Podcast, brought to you by Unique Senior Care. And you might be wondering if you have a loved one, a relative, a neighbour, a friend who maybe needs some help or support or care. How do I actually find a care provider that really cares, that's going to provide the quality that I want for that person that's important to me? So to help us answer that question, we've got a fantastic guest today, Dr Jane Townson OBE. So thank you ever so much, Jane, for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's really good to be here.
You are the Chief Executive of the Homecare Association, but you've also done a whole range of other really awe-inspiring work during your career. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your professional experience?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. So my first career actually was as a scientist. So I studied biology at university, did a degree, a master's degree, and then a PhD. And I joined ICI, which was a UK-based large company that focused in lots of different areas. You might remember the Dulux dog, do you, that ICI paints? But I was in the biological science parts of the business, ICI Pharmaceuticals and agribusiness. We then demerged from ICI, became Zeneca, then merged with a Swedish company called Astra to form AstraZeneca, which I think most people have heard of, particularly in connection with vaccines. And then later parts of that company split off from the main AstraZeneca and merged with another company, Swiss company, to form a new organisation called Syngenta, which is one of the world's largest agribusinesses. So the first 14 years of my career were spent in that family of companies in research and development in bioscience. So I was responsible for international research teams in the UK, Switzerland, North America, and then research projects all over the world. When I left there, I actually went back to university to study nutrition because I was interested in I'd been concerned about growing food and having enough food to feed the world, but I hadn't really properly thought about the impact of nutrition on long-term health. So I went to study that and then set up my own company teaching and consulting about the impact of nutrition and other lifestyle factors on long-term health. I missed being in a large organisation, so I applied to become a non-executive director on the board of an NHS trust. And I did that all together for 9 years. And halfway through that, one of my colleagues on that board said, I've seen an advert for a non-executive role on a care company. You'd be good at that, Jane. Why don't you apply? So I applied and was appointed. And my plan was to carry on doing those 2 non-exec roles and continue growing my business. But then there was a bit of a corporate change, and the CEO and chief operating officer left quite suddenly. So the board asked if I was willing to stand in temporarily as interim chief executive just for 3 months. And I rather reluctantly agreed because I was quite busy doing other things. But anyway, when they went out to advert to look for a permanent CEO, by this time I'd become quite hooked on the whole organisation, and I could see what needed to be done, so I applied and they appointed me. So I sort of accidentally became a care CEO. That was of a not-for-profit organisation. We delivered about 20,000 hours a week of home care. We had supported living for people with disabilities. We had a big joint venture with McCarthy and Stone in housing with care. So at the time I left, we had 92 registered locations of that. And we also had 30 care homes. So that was useful because it gave me experience across different settings, and I learnt in that it's horses for courses, that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And the great opportunity that we had was that we could move people from one setting to another if that became necessary. So I was with that organisation for 8 years altogether, and then the opportunity came up to move to what was then UK HCA, the UK Homecare Association. I was already on the board of the UK HCA as a non-executive director, and I was very interested in national policy. I could do a certain amount from my regional role, but in order to influence at a national level and sort of make more of a difference over more organisations, I was really interested in moving into that kind of organisation. So that's how I ended up here. So it's been just over 6 years since I started, which was, I think I joined in May 2019. So I'd been in role for about 9 months before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. And obviously that was quite a difficult, well, understatement of the century, quite a difficult time for everybody.
Tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, about what maybe you've experienced within your own family, friends or neighbours.
So far in my family, we've been fortunate. My mum and dad are in their mid-80s, but they're living at home independently and in reasonably good health. So we haven't got to the care stage. My grandparents, all 4 of them, well, my grandfather died when he was 70 of a heart attack, which for his generation was quite common. And it's only since we've had drugs like statins that people have stopped happening. The other 3 all made it well into their 80s, but were all in care homes at the very end. And various aunts and uncles have required care. Neighbour-wise, I live in a village in rural Somerset, and neighbours are very good at supporting each other. Sometimes people have been into hospital and come out with reablement care requirements, and I've kept an eye on what's been going on. In one example, a neighbour a couple of doors down was receiving care, but at the time I was CEO of the care company where the care workers came from, and that was probably a little bit daunting for the care workers to discover. But generally it all worked very well.
Great. And it's great to hear there is still those communities around where people look out for one another and have that informal care, of a village or an area. It's something that can make a huge difference, and we probably don't really appreciate enough how the context that a person is living in can really affect their well-being. So one of the things we really want to think about today is if you are sat at home, you've realised that your mum, your dad, your loved one needs some help and support. How do I start on that journey? How do I identify the right care provider that's going to be the kind of quality that I would want?
I think in my experience as a care provider in my previous role, we had quite a number of people phoning up our various different offices asking for help. And one of the most common features was that people didn't really know what was available. Quite often they'd phone us up and they'd say, I need a care home. And then you'd talk to them for a little bit and realise that they probably didn't. So I think the most important thing is to phone up and speak to somebody, because it is quite difficult. Obviously you can do a lot of searching online, and I would advise doing that, because at least then people will know what type of offers are available. But nowadays there are all kinds of choices. Do you want to stay in your own home? You can have live-in care when the care worker's there 24/7. And for many people that is an alternative to being in a care home, but it depends very much on your individual needs. So I think the most important thing is to talk to somebody who understands all of the options available, because it can be quite difficult working that out yourself. The other people that you can talk to that, at least in theory, should be helpful are the local councils, and they vary across the country, but generally speaking I'd say that the help that you can access is quite useful, and at the very least you will understand whether you're entitled to any benefits of any kind, attendance allowance or support with equipment. There's quite a lot that can be done monitoring equipment, so you might not actually need care yet, but your family are concerned that something might happen to you and nobody would know. But now there are loads of devices and monitoring equipment that councils have got, assistive technology departments, and they can send somebody to do an assessment. That may be enough for some people in the short term, and then if they might, it depends whether people are paying for themselves or whether they're receiving support from the council. If it's the latter, there may be fewer options available because you have to accept what they are willing and able to pay for. If you're paying for yourself, there is much more freedom in terms of what services you access. So some people, for example, want help going out to see their friends or to go shopping or to go to the theatre. Very unlikely that the council would pay for that if you were a state funder. But if you're paying for yourself, then there's many organisations that will support you with that kind of thing. And then if your needs progress and you've developed a relationship with a particular organisation, then there's flexibility to change what services you receive as your needs change.
Yeah. We often find that, care is one of those areas that we don't tend to, unless we work in the industry, we don't tend to know a lot about until we get to that crisis point and something happens and suddenly then we think, oh, we need some help. And like you've mentioned, people don't really know what are the options. I think the awareness is growing now, but certainly in the past it was very much at home or care home. And we often get people call us up and they're at that point of crisis. But it's usually much better to try and think ahead a little bit and get something in place, maybe have a small amount of help, and then, as you say, build that up and adapt it as the person's needs change.
Yes, I think most care providers are very willing to be flexible and responsive, and that's how innovation happens too, that people ask for something that they're not doing and they think, oh, that's a good idea, we'll do that. So it can be very tailored for individuals. So it just very much depends. The only way that you can find out is to go and talk to people.
Absolutely. And we've had some of our carers have been on holiday with our clients. Yes. They've accompanied them to family weddings. They've made them able to do something that was on their bucket list, do some fantastic things. So there's so much out there if you know where to look and how to access it. You've mentioned a couple of times, speaking to someone. What do you think the role of gut instinct would be when you have those conversations with a care provider? How much would you kind of say to listen to what that's telling you?
I think it depends on the nature of the care service. If people are going to look in a care home, for example, I would very strongly recommend that they physically go and have a look and just sit and watch, because it's watching interactions. It's are people picking up things that get dropped on the floor? If they're not paying attention to the small things, are they paying attention to the big things? In home care, it's a little harder from that point of view because there's not like a facility that you can go to. But I would say that the type of response you receive when you're talking to the office is important. Do you feel that the people that are talking to you are really listening? Are they asking you questions that might help them really understand what it is that you're after? Are they giving you time and space? Quite often, in my previous role, we would train our teams to not just take work because somebody asked for it. So it's fine to say, actually, we think that this, we can't give you the right service at the moment, but we know somebody who can. And the number of times that has actually benefited us in the long run, because people don't like to feel that they're being sold to. They want to feel that your main concern is meeting their needs and their welfare. And I think I think that's what I would be saying as well. Do you feel, if you feel under any pressure, that would be a warning flag for me. And because with care, like you said, it can be a distress purchase if people have left it too late. And sometimes something will have happened, like dad will have had a fall or somebody will have gone into hospital and the whole family starts being anxious.
Yeah.
And so they might have conversations and then dad rallies and picks up. And so then they don't pursue it. And we found that with our inquiries, if we went back even 6 months, 8 months later, sometimes that would lead to it just from the point of view of saying, you contacted us 6 months ago, we're just checking in to see if you're all right, if you got fixed up, is everything okay? And in quite a number of cases, people would say, well, actually, we were all right, but now things have gone downhill again. And they were impressed about the fact that we had gone back to them to check. So I think the main message is that it can be a slow burn, especially if you're considering residential care, which obviously as home care, we know that you can support people for a long time, many people until the end of life at home. But sometimes if there's somebody with quite advanced dementia and there's nobody else in the house and the other person in the house is older and frail themselves, they might not be able to manage. And unless you've got 24/7 care in that situation, it can be quite difficult to maintain safety and well-being for everybody concerned. So it's very much dependent on the particular circumstances and is their family close by. There are many people who are really quite frail but live on their own, but because they've got family members not far away, it's possible to support them. If people have got nobody and they're quite isolated and they're at risk because they might be leaving the house and wandering and so on, then it's a different situation. So it's very much getting into the detail of what the particular setting and circumstances are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what really great customer service is about. It's when that person that you're talking to, it really feels like they care about you and your situation and the person that you're looking for care for, and they want to give you the best option.
Yes.
Which might be to say, as you mentioned, actually, have you thought about this other option that we don't provide? And I think you've also mentioned technology there and the role that can have. I know that's something that you've been a great advocate and champion for in your career, to look at digitally how can we enhance care and well-being. So if you did have a relative at home, what kind of technology might be helpful for them to keep them independent and safe?
I think it very much, again, depends on the needs. There's literally no shortage of technology solutions. And I think the market has improved a lot. Some of the early devices were quite stigmatizing, the pendant alarms that you can see if somebody's got one of those. But now you can get, Apple Watches or not just that make, but lots of different ones that just don't look any different from anybody else's, and none of us want to feel that we're old. And I feel in general that quite a lot of the time when people may feel that they're disabled, the problem is not their physical state, it's the fact that the equipment isn't designed to support them. So even something like opening a fridge can require a fair bit of physical strength, or opening a milk bottle. I mean, even if you're a young, able-bodied person, trying to pull that foil thing off because it's really slippery and difficult is not easy necessarily. So I feel that there's a lot more that we could do with basic product design to support all of us, because if you think about it, in 20, 30 years' time, there's going to be twice as many people over 85 as now. There won't be enough people to provide one-to-one care for everybody. So everyone's going to have to find ways of being more independent. And some of those very practical matters, I think, is even things like getting in and out of cars can be very difficult the way that they're designed. Design a car that makes it easy to get in and out of, and that will actually also help able-bodied people too.
So that's really interesting, because we often think about, OK, what device can I get to make life easier? But actually, if the products were designed with ease in mind in the first place, then maybe we wouldn't need to get these extra devices and bits of technology.
Yes, I think house design in general is an area that's been quite neglected in the UK, very few domestic homes have got, for example, wide enough doorways to get wheelchairs through. There's lots of steps. There aren't necessarily handrails. I noticed one of our sons lives in Japan, and there they've used universal design principles when designing towns and cities. So everything is sort of made easier, even things like noises that you can hear when crossing a road. And the pavements have got textured paving slabs so that you can tell if you can't see properly where you are, how close to the edge of a road you are. And the housing is designed with accessibility in mind, which makes it possible for more older people to live in the towns and cities. And in Japan, they do that. They move from the country into the towns, whereas in the UK, everyone's doing the opposite, and they're moving to coastal and rural areas, which is all very nice, except the problem is that the working age people that would be available to support older people don't live there. They're all in the towns. So we've got a mismatch of workforce and need.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you've mentioned how the demographics changing and how in the future we're going to have so many more people living longer, which is wonderful. But how are we going to actually fill those needs and those gaps that are created by that?
And if we've got a limited workforce, you ideally need as many people as possible in a fairly tight geographic area. So the same workers, the same home care workers, can see more people in a given time. In very rural areas, such as I live in Somerset, the distances that the care workers have to drive are really significant. And that's another barrier. Just the time it takes, the cost of transport, the fact that the way that councils pay, for example, is for client contact time only, and usually the fee rates are not enough to cover all of the travel costs properly. So these are all barriers. In other countries like Japan, they've partially solved that by creating living environments. And in Australia, they've done something similar in that they've designed these retirement communities in towns. And that actually helps the towns as well, because the shops have then got natural customers because everybody's there. And it makes it possible to have more cafes and even exercise areas designed for older people. So I think there's a huge amount that could be done, but unfortunately in the UK, nobody in government is thinking strategically about how we prepare ourselves for the next 20 or 30 years.
And that's a really important role that the Homecare Association plays. You think about the big picture and you think about the future needs, and you campaign and you lobby, and you have a key role in doing that and getting government to think.
Well, we certainly try.
Yeah, but a challenge, certainly.
Caring for someone you love is one of the most important things you'll ever do, but it's not always easy. At Unique Senior Care, we're here whenever you need support. Whether it's a bit of advice, short-term respite, or ongoing care, we've been supporting families for over 15 years, and you can lean on us too. Call 0808 134 1164 to speak to a care expert, or visit uniquecare.co.uk.
So we've already talked a little bit about how you might spot a good provider, and you did mention a warning flag as well, or a red flag. Are there any others that you would particularly ask someone to look out for if they're speaking to an organisation or they've had somebody come out to talk to them about care?
I think anybody who's looking for care for a loved one, it's very important that you do your research, and in a local community, the best way is word of mouth. Nowadays, there are many online review sites, so quite a few people will use sites like Trustpilot to leave reviews, or there are organisations like homecare.co.uk. Talk to the local GP surgery, to the district nurses, to the social workers. Most of them have got experience of local care organisations. Still, I would say look at the Care Quality Commission ratings, but unfortunately the Care Quality Commission has got very behind with its inspection regime. they were instructed by the Secretary of State to stop doing routine inspections during the pandemic. Personally, I think that was a mistake. We had conversations with the Care Quality Commission at the time and said, look, the BBC was working with us to get media coverage of issues being experienced by care workers. And Alison Holt at the BBC, for example, we were basically using smartphones. So we were, putting smartphones to care workers were just taking smartphones in to the people that they were supporting, and they were doing interviews like that. And I said to the Care Quality Commission, well, if the BBC can talk to the people drawing on services and care workers using smartphones, why can't you? I don't think the remote nature of it needs to get in the way, and arguably at the moment in this time you need to be more vigilant, not less. But their focus turned to residential care, but even with residential care they didn't physically go and visit a lot of places. And I sort of understand that they'd get criticism if they did, they'd get criticism if they didn't. But it was a time of heightened risk, not just of infection, but of isolation. If families were not allowed in to visit, who were the eyes and ears?
Yeah.
And, there were care workers. I was at the COVID inquiry last week, and there was an Admiral nurse speaking, and she'd worked in 2 care homes during the pandemic. And in one of the care homes that she worked in, all of the staff got COVID. At one point, she was the only member of staff that was not isolating, apart from the people who were running the kitchen, which was, frankly, a relief. At least they were still producing the food. But the toll on that individual of trying to keep the show on the road was huge. And not having anybody... In the end, in that example, she did contact the Care Quality Commission herself and reported herself as a safeguarding issue, because she said, I'm worried about getting tired and making a mistake. And the CQC inspector in that case was really kind and said, it's not you that needs to report yourself, you need to report the organisation. Yeah. And then they found ways of sending reinforcements to help her. But I do think it was a big mistake that there was no oversight. And now they're so far behind, that there are home care services that haven't had an inspection for 7 or 8 years. And quite a lot of new care providers started up immediately following the pandemic. And some of them have been registered for 3 years and haven't had an inspection, which I think is outrageous. So I think it's problematic. But, still worth looking at the CQC website, because they are trying to catch up. So it may be that the services that you're interested in have had a more recent assessment. But I think the best thing really is to ask around locally. And I think if you hear from others that the staff are always changing, they don't seem to know what they're doing, they can't speak English properly, any number of things can go wrong, those would be warning flags.
Yeah, sure. So CQC ratings may be a piece of the puzzle rather than the whole picture, and perhaps it's worth looking at the date of the inspection, which will be clearly shown on the CQC website, to think, well, actually, how long ago was it and what might have changed? And that word of mouth, in a rural community, in a village, it might be easy to get that from neighbours and people you know. Other times we are relying on it more online, and perhaps looking at that Google review or home care ratings as a kind of word of mouth that's used in a different way nowadays if we don't know other people in the same situation as us.
Yes, I'd like to see the sector upping their game in this area of customer reviews, because if you have a delivery from Amazon, let's say, they immediately send you an email, were you happy or not happy? And you can give feedback. And okay, it might be a bit formulaic, but if there were a problem with a particular, in that example, delivery driver, that would fairly quickly show up if everybody commented. And certainly the new 10-year plan that was launched by the NHS, by the government last week, they are wanting to use the NHS app much more in that way, and giving citizens the opportunity to give more instant feedback about their experiences, and I do think that that would be a good idea. I mean, obviously there'll be a lot of noise in there as well, but if you have enough data, you can process the noise.
Yeah, definitely. So you would say that the value of looking at those online reviews might be as important as looking at the CQC rating?
It's certainly another place to look. I do know quite a few people who haven't necessarily been put off by like a requires improvement rating, because requires improvement, just as an example, can be quite a big range from not really all that bad, you've missed ticking a few boxes, through to something that's verging on inadequate. So there's quite a big range in there. And also, as we know, that if you have a change of registered manager, services can improve or decline quite rapidly. Like in the space of 6 months, in my experience, services can be turned around in a good way or in a bad way. So even when CQC was performing as they should have done, there still might be 3-year gap between inspections. Nothing really beats going in and investigating yourself to a degree. And as I said earlier, definitely if you're thinking about residential care, you must go and look. There isn't any way that you can rely on reviews. In home care, it's a bit harder, but you could ask for references. You could ask the provider, can you suggest one of your customers that I can speak to? Most people would be very happy to do that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and perhaps something that we don't think of when we're looking for care.
And I'd say to care providers, if you can encourage your customers to give you testimonials, I think that helps. I also think it's amazing how in this day and age there are still some care providers that don't even have a website. Now, I personally wouldn't buy care off an organisation that didn't have a website. And some of the websites that exist are not very good. I like to see pictures of the people that will be supporting. And, in my previous role, all of our registered managers had their photographs on our website, because you kind of want to see a friendly face. Who is it I'm going to be talking to? And are they inviting you into, even in home care, are they inviting you into the office to physically go and talk to them? Because that way it's easier to get a sense of how is the office run. You can go in there. Is it calm? Does it feel kind of organised, or is there like bits of paper everywhere, and is it really chaotic? Some of those things will give you a bit of a. It's not perfect, but it's all data, isn't it? You probably need lots of different touch points to get a sense.
So to have that research head on, and to explore perhaps several different options so that you can compare and contrast and see which one you get the best feeling for and the best amount of good data, as it were.
The other thing I'd say as well is that we're people helping other people, and everybody has got the best will in the world, but things do go wrong because it's just the way it is. If something happens, don't be afraid to raise concerns. Again, a good provider will listen and acknowledge that and act on it. And I would be looking for the ones that are responsive to those kind of issues. Even if it's a relatively small thing, quite often families are afraid of complaining. They don't want to seem critical. But actually, as a care provider, you can't fix something that you don't know about. So I think trying to impress upon people when they start using your services that's encouraged, that you welcome their feedback, even if it seems small and niggly. If it's bothering you, raise it. And actually, the more small things that are reported and you deal with, the evidence shows the fewer big things you get. So it's trying to create the right culture, isn't it? That things happen. Nobody can be perfect. It's an imperfect world, and you might have a brilliant care worker, but she falls off her bike on the way to work or something, and then you've got to replace her in that moment. But if the overall service is meeting needs, then that's fine.
I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Nothing is perfect. You know, even the best outstanding care provider, things are not going to go 100% of the time completely to plan. But how do they then respond to that issue, that problem, that niggle? Are they listening? Are they proactive? Are they actually actively seeking your feedback and saying, how's it going? Those things are probably a really good green flag, aren't they?
That's right.
To look out for.
The Care Quality Commission, I was actually looking at, I did some analysis of reports that have been published since January recently. And the providers that fall down, that requires improvement or inadequate ratings, it's usually on both safe and well-led categories. And on the well-led one, it's always about governance. Have you got systems in place to realise that things are going wrong? And when you do, are you doing anything about them?
Yeah.
So it's that. You know, in my experience, the Care Quality Commission is much less worried about the fact that something's gone wrong than they'd be much more worried if something had gone wrong and you didn't know about it, or that you did know about it and hadn't done anything.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really gets providers bad ratings. So I think, you know, absolute honesty, even as you say, if it's that things haven't really quite been perfect, because it honestly amazes me that more things don't go wrong, because you know we've got a workforce that isn't, the society as a whole doesn't treat that workforce with the respect that they deserve, and everybody's got their own issues. They might have got a sick child at home, or they might have got a ill parent themselves. You know, there's a lot of pressures on them. Just, you know, like all of us, we've all got things that happen, don't they? And then you're going into the home of somebody who is at risk in some kind of way. So the chance of things not being perfect are quite high. And it does amaze me, honestly, that so many brilliant things happen. You know, but it's great. It's a great testament to the care workers, and you know, so many of them will go back in their own time and sort things out, which again I don't think should be an expectation, but their whole driver is to improve lives.
Yeah.
The Unique Senior Care Advice Hub is a free online resource to help you make sense of care. It's full of expert advice, practical guides on things like dementia and funding, and real stories from families who've been in your shoes. Visit uniquecare.co.uk/care advice hub to feel more confident about what comes next.
You talked a bit about culture and companies being well led. How important do you think that is? If I was looking for a care provider to try and understand, well, it's not just about that individual carer that my mum or dad gets on with really well, but actually I want to think, what's the culture of this organisation like? How might that be important, and how can I spot one with a good culture versus not?
I think it's the number one most important thing. However brilliant you are as a care worker, if the people that are running the organisation don't care about you, not paying you properly, haven't got the right systems, the right processes, aren't reporting things, there's nothing that you can really do to make the whole service good. So it's the most fundamental thing. I would say, again, it depends on the size of the organisation. If it's a large national provider, you're not going to see the CEO very often, but it would be interesting to know, you know, if you do write to them about anything, how quickly do you get a response? What sort of response do you get? But at a local level, in a reasonably small provider, which 85% of home care operators are, it is back to that. What sort of response do you get if you have to go up the line? So let's say you ask a care worker to help you and they can't for whatever reason. So you go to the office manager. Do you get fobbed off, or are you listened to? Does anything happen? Do you get your query answered? If you email, do you get a reply? How quickly? I mean, you know, they're not in and of themselves a make or break, but it's all, each thing is data that builds up a picture.
Yeah.
Is the way that somebody speaks to you kind, you know, compassionate, or do you feel like you're being a nuisance? Are you receiving your invoices on time? You know, just some of the basic business processes as well. It just all and how do the care workers seem? You talk to them. What are they telling you? And okay, you're always going to get some that moan about things. That's just human nature. But in the best organisations, they'll say, oh, it's just a brilliant place to work.
Yeah.
I feel really well supported. I've been properly trained. If I've got a problem, I can phone the office and get help at any time. Look at the records. Now we've got many more providers, nearly 80% are using digital social care records. Most of the systems allow families access. In my previous role, when we first introduced those, which we would have done years before if there'd been anything to buy, but the technology solutions were much slower to develop for home care than they were for care homes. But that made a big difference to us, because in the past, families would phone up the office and they'd say, oh, I'm really worried about mum. Has she eaten her breakfast this morning? And now they can actually just log on and see mum's eaten her breakfast, and they can see what the carer has written. And it really has removed a lot of anxiety, because families often experience guilt that they're not there in person to do the care for their loved one. And we would say, well, actually, don't feel guilty, because we're here to be that professional support. You can still be communicating with them, and it doesn't sort of change your relationship with someone because you're not having to be their carer. But, practicalities dictate people have got jobs to do, families to look after. They can't necessarily just drop everything and go and live with mum, can they? So I think some of just the openness with which providers allow you to know what's happening, I think is a good sign. Are they communicating with you if something happens? So
all about that honesty, that openness.
Yes.
Not just with CQC, but with families, with everyone involved.
And yes, and like I said, talk to the local health professionals as well. Yeah. Because most of them, the social workers, for example, on the whole, have got a reasonable idea. It depends on the community. Like in a big city, that would be perhaps a bit harder. But even in London, although it's a big city, there are lots of sort of geographic areas that feel quite like a village, and local people do know each other. Yeah. And I think people are quite good at looking out for each other. And I talked about rural communities earlier, but people who run the local shops will notice if somebody doesn't quite seem themselves, or if they haven't turned up at all, for example. And that's, I think, where some of the technology solutions can be really helpful. I was talking to somebody a while back who had put some movement sensors in their dad's house, and they noticed that he wasn't leaving the house. Previously, he used to go to church every day because he was a good Catholic, and he wasn't leaving the house. And they didn't say to him, we've noticed that you haven't left the house, because that might seem a bit like they were spying on him. But they said, oh, have you seen Bob recently? Because they knew that Bob was a friend that he met at church. And he said, no, I haven't seen Bob for a while. Oh, why is that, Dad? Well, because I haven't really been to church. And then that sort of gave him the opportunity to ask why. And it turned out in that case that his eyesight had been declining, and he was worried about crossing the road to get to church. So they were able to sort out the eye problem, and then he went back to church. And that's a really good example of how a very simple technology solution of movement monitoring triggered a conversation that they wouldn't have thought to ask about had they not known. Yeah. But it was done in quite a sensitive way.
Yeah, and a great reminder of how sometimes our loved ones they want to be independent. They don't want to create worry for us, so they may just keep those things to themselves rather than say, hey, look, I'm struggling and I can't see very well and I'm not getting to church. So I think that's a brilliant example of using tech that's not intrusive. Looking back a while, the only option we had was a CCTV camera, which is a very intrusive form of watching somebody. And now actually we have so many different ways of using technology to monitor someone's well-being that is, a lot better for their privacy and their dignity and their human rights. So.
But even technology solutions that are nothing to do with monitoring. So, for example, now you can get these robotic vacuum cleaners.
Yes.
And quite a few years ago, I went to Germany, to Düsseldorf University, where they'd been doing a big piece of pan-European research on assistive technology in different countries. And there was one lady, they'd done a Google search at the time, and I think they'd identified over 100 different devices, and they sort of range from a key fob that would open your front door automatically, which was great if you're in a wheelchair and you can't sort of these remote sort of vacuum cleaners, all sorts of things. But the lady that had been trialling that, she said that the big benefit to her of this remote vacuum cleaner was that it gave her time to watch music hall videos on YouTube, which is what she really enjoyed doing. And that was one of the things I found very, very fascinating about that research. So some of the people, they'd given things like remote vacuum cleaners, but they'd given one lady in London, she was worried about her personal safety and security because she was in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. She was worried that a burglar would come to the front door and she'd be defenceless. So they had a CCTV camera sort of trained on her front door, and they gave her a tablet, an iPad thing, so that she could see, who was at her front door. But then somebody taught her how to use Facebook, which she hadn't been aware of. And then she realised that through Facebook she could connect with some old friends that she hadn't seen for years. So suddenly her worries about the door and the security faded, and her obsession became, using the tablet for human connection. And the lady with the vacuum cleaner and the music hall, it wasn't the vacuuming that was important to her. Actually, it was that opportunity to do something that she loved, which was listening to music. And then having the tablet gave them a connection to the outside world. So for me, it was interesting that the thing that people prized and valued was that social connection, not so much the practical tasks. Whereas quite a lot of the people that invent these gadgets are focused on the practical tasks. And in general, I feel that there's not enough of the suppliers of these things do enough research about what people want and need, and what their families want and need might not be the same thing either. And also, there needs to be a lot more research about implementation as well, because some of the movement monitoring devices, for instance, are not particularly sensitive, so they can't tell the difference between somebody's pet moving and them moving. And then the problem is that you get a lot of false alarms. So if the alarms are going to a family member that, let's say, is 20 miles away, 30 times of that going off a week, they're going to get alarm fatigue and are going to stop going. And then it doesn't really help you, because the one time that you do need it, they're not going to go. So I think there's still quite a lot more work that needs to be done, and also just in how the data are processed, because in a small organisation, you can very quickly end up with piles and piles of data. Some of our members were doing trials with various remote health monitoring devices, monitoring Betty's blood pressure. And then they go along to the GP with all these piles of data about Betty's blood pressure. And the GP was like, oh, no, go away. I can't deal with it, because they just didn't have the time. So I think if we're going to take that approach, which we will have to, we're going to, as local health systems come up with some better ways, I think there need to be some CQC registered response centres that have some clinicians involved as well, so that the data all goes there, and then they can support providers with knowing which alarms are worth dealing with and which aren't. But we're still a fair way, it seems, from that situation.
Let's say we've got to that point, we've done our thorough research, we've got our care provider, and we're getting to that point where we're ready to start, and the care provider is learning about us, our relative, and our needs. What questions should we be asking, or should they be asking at that stage, to make sure that what we're going to get is the very best care?
So I think the most important factor is that they need to have a really good conversation with the person who will be drawing on the services. Even if they apparently lack capacity, because capacity it fluctuates, and I think the point is that, it depends on the situation, obviously, but the conversation needs to happen with the person that you're going to be supporting, not in their absence, even if they are, are frail, or maybe they've got some form of dementia, but still, if you ask somebody, do you like tea or coffee, they may well be able to tell you that. So, and then I think the question would be, what outcome are you hoping for? And, that may change over time as well, which is another point. So let's say somebody's come out of hospital. Let's say they broke their leg. Initially, the issue would be that they need support washing and dressing, but the outcome that they want might be to get back to being able to do that themselves independently. And then, there may be other things after that. For example, somebody may want help with preparing food that they really like, not just to have some heat and serve thing dumped on them, or some sandwich in a foil package left on the side. So it's getting down to what's important to that person. That's really the key. Not what forms are you going to fill in, but what would good look like to them as a person. And as a family member, how would you know what felt good for you? Like, for that, the answer might be, I don't have to worry because I know that your team cares for my mum in the same way that I would. But obviously in the beginning, they wouldn't necessarily know that. That confidence and that trust has to be built up and earned. I think I would be trying to test their understanding of any health condition that my loved one had, the way that they communicate with other health professionals about, are they going to escalate concerns? Are they going to advocate for them? Asking them to give examples of how they've done that with other people without breaching confidentiality. Asking to see the records that they keep. Obviously you can't show them somebody else's records, but having a general sort of idea of what information are you gathering. I would be asking them how they can give me assurance that they're keeping that data secure and safe, especially in this day and age. So how frequently they're going to visit, or how they're going to go about meeting the needs. But that can only really be done in a conversation with the person. And it does also, unfortunately, depend on whether the person is paying for their own care or having it funded by the council, because a council will have a fairly prescriptive approach. And I think it would be worth testing in a way, or the care provider sort of checking with the family what's important. So, for example, if they go to visit Betty and she says, today, I don't really want my breakfast. I want to go and chase seagulls in my pyjamas. Just giving a silly example. Are you going to enable Betty to do that? Or are you going to sit there and say, oh, sorry, Betty, but I've been told I've got to give you your breakfast? It's how you make those that's a bit of a silly example, but I would be interested in the providers that are trying to do what Betty wants within reason. Obviously, if she did that every day and didn't eat anything, that would be a different matter. But, it's making those judgments, isn't it, about what is in somebody's, what is right for somebody.
And in essence, rather than just being about tasks, going in and doing this job is actually about that person. It's about building a relationship with them. It's about the goals that matter to them, which might be keeping their garden, looking lovely. It might be walking regularly with their pet.
Exactly.
These are the things that often, or connecting with someone socially, as you mentioned earlier, these are the things that often really matter, that sometimes if we're too focused on the jobs that we're there to do, can get lost along the way. So 100%. I think, definitely right to talk about how is this company going to try and help my loved one achieve their goals and the things that are most important to them.
I think sorry to interrupt. One other thing is that what can often happen is, especially if people lose mobility, and that would be the number one thing I'd encourage all of us to do, try and keep mobile, because when you lose that ability to go out, your world becomes more bounded.
Yeah.
You become more isolated. So sometimes I've heard older people say, I'm embarrassed to go to the garden centre because I walk so slowly, and so they just don't go.
Yeah.
So I think it's also helping people to see what, the art of the possible. So just because you've withdrawn from that for a while doesn't mean that you can't go back to that. What can we put in place to make that possible for you? For other people, it might be worries about continence, for example. What can we do? We might be able to get the continence nurse in to support you with that. So it's trying to troubleshoot a lot of it. What can we do to enable you to live the life that you would ideally like to have as far as you can?
Yeah, I love that. The art of the possible, and the idea that a carer or a care team can help somebody get back to the things that they think are kind of never going to happen again. We've got a lady, heard a wonderful story just last week, a lady who could barely walk around her home but used to love walking, and now actually she's halfway around the park because her carers talked to her about what she really wanted and about what she enjoyed, and very, very gradually, daily little walk to the front door, walk down the front path, they were able to build her confidence and support her, and that was a huge achievement for that lady, and maybe so much more important than the jobs that the carers were there to do. So
I think a lot of people don't realise that however old you are, you can often regain function. You can build muscle strength. And we had a talk at our tech and home care conference last year from a Dutch organisation that's come up with an app called Digi Rehab. And it's a very simple concept. They teach care workers how to teach the people that they support to do very simple strength exercises, and we're only talking about 20 minutes a week or something. It's not like got to be in the gym for an hour a day and all of that. But one of the ladies that they supported developed enough core strength that she was able to get out of bed herself for the first time in years, and like the look on her face, it was literally life-changing. And I also visited it was a sort of retirement community in Bristol, and because it had 300 units of housing, they were also able to design in really great communal facilities, and they had a gym there which was sort of designed for older people. And there was a lady, she was in her 80s, she'd broken her hip, she'd been in hospital, NHS done a great job of patching her up and sending her back. Apparently prior to this hip injury she'd used a walking frame, and she was still using a walking frame, but there was a nurse on site, and they persuaded this lady to go to the gym, and she did every day for 6 months, and after a while she stopped needing a walking frame anymore, which she'd needed before she went in, which I thought was just a brilliant story. So there is that encouragement to all of us. It doesn't really matter how old you are. Same with using your brain. Keep learning, keep moving, because it all helps to keep independent for as long as possible.
So in care, we often use this word capacity. And in case people are wondering, well, what is that? It's the ability to make a decision, make an informed decision based on the information that you have. And as you mentioned, just because somebody has a condition or is older or is living with dementia, it doesn't mean they don't have capacity. Maybe they are not able to make really complex decisions around their finances anymore, and they might have a power of attorney who helps them with their banking or their financial decisions. But they may still be able to make those everyday decisions. What do I want to wear? What do I want to eat? And involving them in as many decisions as possible. And even the more complex ones, getting their views and thinking about what would have been important to them is a really crucial part.
100%. And that ability to make decisions does fluctuate as well. Different times of the day, sometimes different days of the week. So it's quite... making assumptions is to be avoided, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for talking to us. It's been really fascinating hearing about the technology, some of the stories of the impact that care and technology has had on people's lives and their goals and their dreams. And and also thinking about how to really have a set of questions or ideas of what to look for in a quality provider. So we're going to ask a question that we ask in all of our podcasts. If there was one takeaway piece of advice that you could give to our listeners on this topic of finding the best care provider, what would it be?
Do your research, and I think above all, choose a provider that you feel is listening to you, because if they're not, it's going to be quite difficult to produce good quality outcome.
And listening is so important, isn't it? And if you're listened to from the start, then that's a great sign that somebody's going to care about you and do their best. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
And I'm sure that the advice that you've given will help family members feel a lot more confident about finding a quality care provider. And thank you to everyone for listening. I do hope that you found this episode useful. Remember to check out our Care Advice Hub, where you can find a wealth of practical tips and information on how to navigate the care journey, whatever stage you're at. I've been your host, Jo Cleary. This is the Care Podcast. We hope that you'll join us for the next episode.